we are very pleased to welcome Dr. NAJAT MAALLA M'JID, and she will be discussing the essential role that social norms play in protecting children from sexual exploitation and abuse. Dr. M'JID served as the United Nations Special Rapporteur for the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography from 2008 to 2014. And so she'll be sharing her findings and her observations from her research and country visits during that tenure. She actually has a long history of working, Dr. M'JID, in protection of vulnerable children. She's been working in this area for the past 3 decades and is also the founder of BAYTI, which is the first program for children living and working on the streets in Morocco. So, Dr. M'JID, we're very glad to have you here with us today, and we look forward to your talk and to questions and discussion.
Hi, and I am so happy really to share with you some lessons I learned during my mandate as Special Rapporteur of United Nations on the sale of children, child prostitution, and child pornography during 6 years, but also pediatrician and also as activist in one NGO working with children in difficult circumstances. And I want really to focus on some points because I think we need to take more than 1 hour to discuss about social norms. And my presentation is really focusing on how social norms are so important regarding child protection against all forms of violence, including child sexual exploitation and child sexual abuse. I am not going really to focus a lot on child protection, but I think you know better than me that when we are speaking on children, we are meaning that we are speaking about boys and girls under 18 years in compliance with CRC Article 1. And also when we are speaking about violence is really a big umbrella definition. And when we are focusing on sexual violence, it includes a lot of forms, such as really child sexual abuse, child sexual violence, rape, incest, having also child sexual exploitation online, including also child prostitution, child sex tourism, or we call it actually child sexual exploitation in travel and tourism. And we have also other forms like early and forced marriage and also all the female mutilation genes. I want to insist on one point, that you know we have many forms of violence who are often interlinked, and a child can be both or successively victim of abuse, neglect, exploitation, and violence. And even regarding sexual violence, the same child could be both or successively victim of child sexual abuse, child sexual exploitation, or child sexual violence. I want also to highlight the fact that we have many places where this kind of violence occurs. It could be in families, and regarding the last study done by UN on violence against children, Mr. Pinero, the independent expert, highlighted the fact that there are many sexual abuse that occur in families. Also in communities, depending also, and here I think we will focus more later, regarding some social norms, some social practices, and also in schools, in streets, in institution, in police station, in cross borders, and also online. Another point I want to highlight also that it's not easy to deal with the really violence against children and mainly sexual violence against children because you have many complex and multidimensional factors. Some are push factors, some are pull factors, and all these factors that are really related to local, national, or more widely at transnational level are increasing vulnerability to children. And I want to focus also, you have this big picture, you have a kind of many factors who are underlying and increasing vulnerability, and we have here social norms is one of the factors who could increase vulnerability of children to some forms of sexual violence. Another point very quickly also I want to remind you, and you know better than me, that violence against children and mainly sexual violence against children had really a long-lasting impact on children regarding their physical, their life, their survival, but also many, many other problems regarding their psychological development, their mental development, and mainly also regarding some sexually transmissible disease, HIV, and early pregnancy. And another point I want to highlight, to share with you, and I know that you better than me, is that we spoke more and more about child protective environment and systems. Because if we want really to protect duly and on a sustainable way child protection against all the forms of violence, including sexual violence, we need to build child protective systems, including a lot of measures that prohibit, prevent, and respond to all these forms of violence. And here you have actually what are the main points regarding child protection system. Child protection system is a coordinated set of laws, policies, strategies, regulation, services, mechanisms, actors, but also social norms. And really because we fight a lot during many years to see how we can include social norms as a big and a strong pillar of child protective systems. This is why I want to highlight this point. I want to, before focusing on social norms, just to highlight the 2 points. Social norms could be a root cause and risk factors, really, and becoming really very harmful against children, but in the same time, social norms, when they are child protective, could be really one big pillar regarding child protection. And here we start. And I want really to tell you that when we are speaking about social norms, it is really not easy to explain. And we clearly, I read a lot and I worked a lot on this issue, and you can have some sociological reviews and many studies were done on this issue, but I am not going here to review all this definition. But what I want to really focus on is that we have many definitions, and you have also various understandings. So in some places or in some studies, you will hear or you will read social norms. In some places, we focus more on cultural practices, social conventions, traditional or religious beliefs. But what I want really to ensure and to define, and I think it's very important when we are speaking about social norms, is really to take account this umbrella definition that embrace both beliefs, perceptions, behaviors, attitudes, and action. And what is important, the social norm, we need to understand that social norms is put in place due to reciprocal expectation among a group of population in a reference network. And I want you really to never forget that we need to have a reference network, and this reference network is behind social norms. And this reference network is those to whom the individual or some person refers. This is very important. And another point I think we need also to focus on is that due to the interdependency of beliefs and attitudes and action within this reference network, it means that it is quite resistant to change a social norm, and also a social norm can persist even among those who would rather not follow the norm. This really to focus on this point. Why? Because in many policies and in many answers, many persons think by raising awareness on children's rights or by raising awareness on some harmful practices, it's enough. No, it's not enough. And we need really to take into account all this interdependency of beliefs, action within the reference network. This is really very important. Another point, that social norms, when we're speaking about social norms, and during all my mandate and all my experience visiting 32 countries in the whole continents, that it's also an evolving and complex phenomenon. Social norms vary significantly across geographic location and also among various groups. And in the same countries, depending on the region where you are, you could have many, many various social norms. And another point, you have also various reference networks. It could be group of spiritual or religious leaders, but also social network, and I remind you that you have also actually the involvement of some other social network among and through internet, but you have also regarding children some other reference networks, some gang leaders, street or crime gangs, and I never forget when I was visiting El Salvador, I met a lot of children who were really part of this gang called Mara, this, and he told me that his only reference is this gang, the Mara, because for him it's very important. He was telling me like that. I was born, my mom gave me birth, but I give my life to Mara, and the reference of this group was only violence. Really, and I think it's very important to think that when we are speaking about social norms, they are not only traditional or cultural, but you have new social norms taking into account and depending on the evolution of the environment where the child is living. This is very important. And due also to globalization, we have emerging social norms. And regarding in the use of internet, you have many, many reference networks who start really being more and more strong, and many children, many youth refers to these social networks. And we will see also, you have also consumerism, and we will discuss this point after, regarding also another kind of social norm for youth. Another point also, I think what I see during all these 6 years and also before, that what is increasing is a kind of social or societal acceptance. And we start normalizing certain forms of violence against children, including sexual exploitation of children. And this is also one big challenge we need to deal with if we want to build a really child protection, a strong child protection system. Another point, this is really to provide you, and I am ready to answer to your question because I focus only on some main points, because we can, as I told you in the beginning, we can spend a long day only speaking about social norm. But here I want in this part to see how this social norm could affect child protection. And in many countries, when you are visiting countries and when you see many problems or many issues related to child protection, really regarding this protective environment, you have to deal first with the legal environment to see if legislation are really in compliance with the Human Child Rights Convention, but also if justice is effective, if justice is appropriate and easily accessible to children, and so on. You have to see also if when you are assessing child protective environments, to see if really you have some policies, strategies really regarding child protection that are put in place. To see also if the institutions that are taking care of children are really in compliance with norms, are having sufficient resource and qualitative human resource. And also the economic environment is also important because it impacts families and children, and the social norms are part of this protective environment. And there are many, many reasons why population groups might engage in behavior that could be beneficial or harmful. You have some really physical reasons such as urbanization, poverty, conflicts, also natural disasters, and so on. But what I want to highlight on this point regarding these reasons, that when you have poverty, when you have political instability, when you have this very, very huge urbanization and anarchic urbanization, and this point is that these reasons really impact families and communities. And in some countries, you have some good child community-based protection mechanisms that become, in the beginning, they were really beneficial for children, but due to all these reasons that impact the communities and families, this really community-based protection mechanism became harmful. And I can give you one example regarding West Africa and Central Africa. We we have what we call the confiage or vidomégon. This is kind when a family is poor or a community is poor, they could really send their child, mainly girls, in one family, more extended family, uncle and so on. But when they send their child to this family, is to be sure that the children is going to have a better life, could have access to school, really to be protected. But what happens in many, many countries, this previous good child protection mechanism become really a kind of child exploitation, child sexual exploitation, but also child economic exploitation. And many, many girls that were really fostered by these extended families became really exploited in prostitution. They become child maids. But in the beginning, this kind of practice was good and has good objectives. But due to the environment, socio-economical and political and so on environment, it become really weaken this child protection mechanism. But our focus is not only that. Our focus is that we need to bear in mind that we have social norms that explain why a behavior, beneficial or harmful, is common in a group. And social norms really have significant implication on the protection of children. And I want to really focus on this point because when we are asking many UN experts and so on, asking government to be sure that they are protecting children and doing actions, we insist a lot regarding legislation, regarding policies, regarding social activities and so on, but we never really focus on how we can deal with some social norms to be sure that we are going to enhance the positive social norms and also work on changing the harmful social norms. And it's really important that to bear in mind that social norms can increase vulnerability, especially when they lead to discriminatory practices regarding gender discrimination, some harmful practices, and social acceptance and the reporting of violations. And also, and we will see, social norms can also influence the functioning of formal institutions and governance. This is important. And social norms can make a number of child rights violation acceptable and not recognized as such. And it's very important. Some kind of social norms. The first is regarding, for example, perception of childhood. And social norms determine to a large extent the perception of childhood in society. Although CRC defines a child as a person under 18, even you have many legislations that define child as a person under 18, but you have in many communities, including children and youth communities, that consider pre-puberty that as the end of childhood. And when they see a child, a puber child, for them it's an adult, it's not a child. As a consequence, child victims of sexual exploitation or abuse are seen instead as guilty of inappropriate behavior or poor upbringing. And for example, in my country, in Morocco, girls, even we have a strong legislation recognizing children as a person under 18, really considering child sexual exploitation as a crime, that a judge, when he is in front of a girl who is between 14 and 16, and she was really victim of sexual exploitation, in many cases for him, she is not a victim, she is guilty. And he really decides really to place her in one center for her rehabilitation because she is guilty. She is not a child, she is little women. Just to tell you that perception are really important and also are really underlying some social norms. Another point, and very, very important, in many, many, many countries, and in the same country, depending on the region, you have gender discrimination, and a number of social practices are really rooted in gender discrimination. Just for example, sexual and gender-based violence against girls, but also early and forced marriage, traditional harmful practice like cutting girls. That really many social practices are rooted in gender discrimination. And also another point, what we realize, that also violence is also increasing not only against girls, but also against lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transgendered young people in many, many regions. What is really important also to highlight that sexual and gender-based violence is often a social norm that is reinforced by government failure to enact and implement laws that provide protection. And in some countries, for example, in Uganda, homosexuality is really a crime, and you can be put in jail regarding this point. And really it's important to take into account that because some boys who could be victims of sexual abuse or sexual exploitation never report to police or justice because of fear and so because of the risk to be judged and to be put in jail. And regarding the harmful tradition and other examples, I am going really to highlight some examples related to child sexual exploitation and violence. You have early and forced marriage that really affects the last report done by UNICEF and WHO estimates that you have 400 million of girls that were affected, that were really victims of early marriage, not only in Africa and in Asia, but also actually in some countries like USA, like Australia, due to the migration of population. Just to tell you that social norms could move within the population, even in some countries where these social norms never existed before. Another point is regarding the female genital mutilation or cutting that affected, regarding also WHO, the last report, 125 million of girls. And really it's important, and we find also this practice done also in countries where this population coming from Africa or Middle East really migrates, for example, in USA and European Union. And for example, in European Union, they estimate in 2013 that we have 500,000 of girls who were victims of this cutting. I want to focus on another point, that it's also another kind of harmful traditional practice that I met during my visit is the forced confinement in Vodou convents. In Benin, for example, during my country visit in 2011, as a UNICEF and the government estimated that they had 172 children, including 60% of girls who were really confined and really jail, kind of jail in Vodou convents in Benin. And you know, during their stay in this Vodou convent, they have no access to their family, they have no access to outside, they are really like living in a jail, they are fighted, and another point, what is important, they are also sexually exploited by the fetishists. And you know what, it's really amazing, and what make me very difficult for me to understand that due really to perception and to beliefs, families paid really for having these children in this convent because in their mind they have some problem and they need really to extract, to do a kind of exorcism of the bad behavior of these girls or of these boys. This is another harmful traditional practice is talibé, children talibé. I don't know if some of you are familiar with this term. And you have many of them in West and Central Africa, is this kind of children who are living in Quranic schools to learn the Quran, but in fact they are not learning Quran, but what they are exploited and forced to beg by their religious teachers. And regarding these social norms, when you try to explain why you have that, and when you discuss with all these persons who are really exploiting these boys, and when you are discussing with parents, and when you are discussing with policy makers, they told you this is really related to Islam. And it's not related to Islam. I am from an Islamic country because I am from Morocco, and I read the Quran. The Quran never asked, and you have no paragraph or no sentence regarding this kind of exploiting children, forcing them to beg, forcing them to be exploited in Islam. Just to really, it's a kind of understanding. They have it since years and years, and it's very difficult actually really to fight this issue. You know why? Not only because of the social norms, but also because this kind of social norm is actually reinforced by the policy maker. Why? Because you have strong marabout in Africa who really provide support to the policy maker, including presidents of some countries. And it is why, really, when you are discussing with policymakers, they told you can do nothing. You know why? Because it's really a deep social norms and it's a religious social norm. But in fact, it's a social norm, but it's not based on religious, really, arguments, but it's also reinforced really by some policymakers because they have some expectation regarding the strong marabouts who help them and support them. Another point also is regarding, in many countries they told you they don't use the justice, the official justice or courts because of the existing of customary laws. And that really lead to some arrangements between families and communities, not taking into account the best interests of child. I can give you one example, and I have not only one regarding that. We have in many countries, when I was in Madagascar, in Benin, also in Kyrgyzstan, what they told you, and you are discussing really with parents and also with judge and with girls who were exploited, sexually exploited. The parents told you that they can't, even they went to justice, the problem is because of fear, because of taboo, because of stigmatization, and also because of lack of trust in justice, they don't go to justice, or even they go to justice, they change their mind, and they use both customary law and the official justice, but in their mind, the child is the community. They provide priority to community. And in many, many cases, even the girl were sexually exploited, you have some kind of arrangements between families and communities, and we forget the best interest of child. This really is important. But also it's important to bear in mind that this kind of customary law, even it is a social norm in some countries, it is also reinforced by the lack of justice services or lack of child really sensitive justice, and it's reinforced also by the lack of trust in justice. This is important because of impunity and corruption. Just to share you and to tell you that when you are dealing with social norms, yes, sure, you have some reasons that explain this social norm, but you have also some current reasons that reinforces this social norm. Another point is regarding also the under-reporting. And because of taboo, because of fear of stigmatization, and you have many, many violences, many cases of violence against children, including sexual and mainly sexual exploitation, that are not reported due to fear, because of the problem of lack or insufficiency of dialogue between families and children, but also even when the parents are aware about the case, they remain silent because they have a fear of the society, because it is really perpetrated by a community leader, and this fear and related to stigma really make that you have many sexual exploitation or sexual abuse that are not reported because family honor is placed above the safety and well-being of children. This is really important, and in many countries, in Arabic countries, but also in some African countries and Asia countries, it's very difficult for families and for girls or boys who were raped really to report on this issue because they have a big fear of stigmatization or only the fact that the community and the family honor are most important than the child. And I want to highlight, as I was telling you, I highlight some points regarding some social norms, some are traditional, but we have emerging social norms within children's own communities. And we need really to take into account these social norms because they impact really the vulnerability of children to child sexual exploitation online. You have more and more, and in all the country and worldwide, children, more especially adolescents, that really put self-generated indecent image online, and in the context of sharing them with their peers, but in the same time, you have some sexual predators who can use these images. Another point also, you have many regarding social networks, chatting, you have many sexual predators who really use these social networks to be in contact with these children. It is what we call grooming and sexting because of the increasing use of internet, of smartphone, and you have many children or youth who are speaking with somebody, they don't knew him, and they were thinking that it's a youth speaking about a lot of things, and in many cases, sexual predators really use the same language that children and try to build contact with them, try really progressively to become their friend and to provide them some contacts or some appointments in view to really abuse them sexually. And another point, what happens in many countries also among young people and mainly among girls, consumerism, you have a lot of girls, and I interviewed many of them, even in my country. Some of them are in school, or some of them are not, but, because they want to have a mobile or to have a kind of bag or some shoes, they could really have some transactional sex with some adults, and in their mind, when you are asking them, when we are speaking with them, telling that it's kind of sexual exploitation, in their mind, it's not identified as prostitution because many of their friends and of their peers are doing the same thing. And another point also is regarding, due to, you have also the increasing of children who are using internet also to have a kind of sexual education, and they are really facing pornography, adults, but also child pornography. You have this confrontation to this child, to this pornography, and every sexualization really distorts perception by both children and adults. And you have many children, they have violent sexuality, and in their mind this is normal. And I don't know if you have some person are French among you, but if you see what happens in many schools, you have what they call in French the tournante, and you have many youth boys that rape 1-2 girls, and they put it online, and for them it's normal. Another point also I want to highlight is the violence between peers. And I don't know if you realize that you have more and more in some cities and in some places that physical violence between peers tends to be more common mainly in urban areas due to the anarchic urbanization, but also the use of drugs and alcohol. And also, as I was telling in the beginning, you have some kind of violence also between gangs and among street children. I work since years and years with street children, and for them violence is really a kind of norm, because if they want to survive, they have to be violent. And just regarding this point, cyberbullying and really is more and more increasing among children, and this is one very, very strong point that's very difficult really to challenge and to deal and to overcome. And I want to highlight also the fact that the mass media actually sometimes portray and make normal violence, and you have including violence against children in print, visual media, in TV programs, but also in video games. Just to tell you that violence between peers becomes in some areas a kind of norm, and it is really accepted by children. And also it is reinforced, this violence among youth, it is reinforced, for example, in suburbs, and you see what happens in France and in some places where there are no social services, they have no access to a really high-level school or qualitative school, and also where police cannot enter, and really it's become a kind of norm in these places. And I want to finish in some more generalistic example in societal acceptance. And I want to highlight it in the example of Madagascar. Really, I have a big fear, and I was very, very, very disturbed when I was in some country, for example, in Honduras, in Salvador, in Guatemala, in Madagascar, in Mauritius also, that you have really a societal acceptance of violence, some kind of violence, and mainly against women or against girls. And really it's become normal for the community. And for me the risk here that the community is becoming complicit of this crime. And the problem is also that, you know, when you have this kind of societal acceptance regarding one form of violence among community, the problem also that it affects the functioning of public institutions. Because when you speak with the police and justice, they told you we can't do action because the permissibility of such practices. And it's really a kind of a vicious cycle, you know. You have a norm, societal acceptance, and the community is complicit because it's normal for them, but justice and police didn't react because it's normal for the community. And it makes all this kind of violence, and including and mainly sexual violence against girls and women, normal. This is really also another challenge. And another example also is for example, in Ghana and in Benin and in Togo, you have one, it's very difficult to define it as social norm, but it's because since years and years, what they call violence in schools, inside schools. But not only physical violence, but sexual violence done by teachers against girls. And if you read some studies, you will read sugar daddies, and you know, the teachers really do it and use it, and you know what, it's amazing, because it is very well known by families, by communities, by police, and also by ministers of education. They set up a lot of decrees, a lot of laws for punishing these teachers, but despite all that, it's still continuing. And my last visit in Benin, in Togo, really highlights the fact that despite these laws, it's really become normal. And you know why? Because for the children or the youth or their parents having a kind of sexual relationship with teachers is promoting social status, and when we will see it more deeply regarding the Madagascar case. Just to really provide you some here during this first part is to give you a kind of global pictures. There is a lot of social norms. Some are traditional, some are evolving, but what is important, we need really to know them very deeply, to see what kind of group of population really is involved in this social norm and what is and who is the reference network. And here I want to give you a another practical case is Madagascar. It was one country visit who make me very, very angry, and I have a really conflict with the policy makers because what I see it was unacceptable. Madagascar become actually one of the most important destinations of child sexual exploitation in travel and tourism. And you have it not only in the coastal cities, sure, but really in the whole country. And just to highlight the fact that it's become a very, very high and huge problem, the criminal code of Madagascar, in its preamble, told and wrote and highlight, it has been noted that sexual exploitation and sex tourism are currently growing at a staggering rate in Madagascar. Children are particularly exposed to the widespread and continuing practices of child prostitution and sex tourism, hence the need to punish those who sexually exploit children who are treated as sexual and commercial objects. Just to tell you that it's really a huge and visible crime that it is recognized by their criminal code. And during my visit in July 2014, what I saw really, it was visiting this country, and I think maybe some of you were there. It's visible in every part of the cities. You see children, boys and girls, very young, with old people, foreigners. They could be their grandfather in tourist resorts, but also in mining areas and also in bars, in cafes, around nightclubs, in private homes, in massage parlors. In every place you see that. And you have thousands and thousands of boys and girls, more and more younger, for example, 13 for girls and 12 for boys that are really exploited in child sex tourism. And regarding push factors, yes, sure, when you are speaking with the population and policymakers, they told you, yes, you have the problem of extreme poverty, and in fact, they had in last year 90% of rate of poverty, lack of economic opportunities, bad quality of school, drop schooling, the problem also of difficulties to have access to basic social services, and you have also the increasing demand for sexual services from children by sex travelers and retired foreigners. And also another point, also the high level of corruption and impunity of the justice system. And taking into account all these factors, and if we add social norms, it's sure that the problem of child sexual exploitation in travel and tourism in Madagascar is really very complex, and I am not sure that they are going to resolve the problem very easily and very quickly if they don't take into account all these factors. And just to give you two main points regarding some social norms that increase and make children more and more vulnerable to child sexual exploitation in tourism. You have in Madagascar the early sexualization of children. The average age of the first sexual intercourse is between 12 to 13 years, and in some cases even between 8 to 10 for girls and 14 to 17 for boys. And children and youth really attached a high value to this sexual intercourse, because for them, for children and girls, adolescents, they gain status from this daring. It is called in Malagasy, Mahasaki. For them, having early sexual intercourse is really a kind of having a status. Another point is really the concept of bazaar, the foreigner, that is highly prevalent, particularly in some coastal areas, because in the mind of the community, having a supposedly rich foreign sexual partner is a symbol of a girl's success. For them, this relationship, in addition to the material benefits it brings, and which girl would have to share with her family, is really reportedly carries a certain amount of prestige. You have two strong social norms, and if you add to that the increasing use of internet, of another kind of social norms, you make these children more and more vulnerable to child sexual exploitation in tourism. This is one example of some social norms. Some of them are maybe traditional, some of them are related to use and to internet. And if you add to this social norm the fact that the justice within the justice system you have corruption and impunity, if you add to this the fact they have the problem of poverty of the families and the lack of access to social services and the lack of policies, it shows that social norms and within the whole system is really are contributing to really more and more vulnerability of children. Another also practice social norm in Madagascar is regarding the early marriage. And you know that for UNFPA, Madagascar is one of the country who has the highest level in the world of early marriage. And you have in some rural areas, you have what they call girl markets, and men can choose their partner in exchange for money or goods, and it's called Tsenan Ampela. It's not in the whole country, but it's more in rural and southern country. Just to tell you, despite laws, and Madagascar ratified all the Child Rights Convention, and they have strong laws, but despite that, you have some social norms who are still existing and increasing in some cases. Just I want to highlight before I give you the floor and hear you, I want to highlight the fact that social norms are reinforced here in this country by increasing poverty, political instability, inadequate schooling, and corruption. And you have, for example, here in Madagascar, two examples: child sexual exploitation in tourism and sale of girls for early marriage in rural area. And I want to highlight the fact that these social norms contribute to strengthening social tolerance for the sale and sexual exploitation of children. I want to focus on the fact that when you didn't tackle social norms efficiently, they become acceptable, and it would be more and more difficult really to tackle this issue and to make them changing. But you have also some social norms that could be child protective.
I was just wondering, since we only have about 5 minutes left, and one of the questions that had come in was actually related exactly to this question of protective norms. I was wondering if we could allow some questions before we close.
My name is Anna Maria Buller. I'm the coordinator of the LINEA initiative. And I would, first of all, thank you for an amazing and comprehensive presentation. My question was regarding, in particular, this idea of protective social norms. And I would like to hear what you had to say about the protection or how social norms can be protective. And in particular, if you have examples during your travels of social norms that successfully were used or strengthen to prevent sexual exploitation of children.
Okay. Your question was good because I was starting speaking about child protective social norm. And just to tell that you have in many, many countries some community-based organizations that really play a protective role. And I can provide you some example. In some countries, you have this protective social norm, such as the importance awarded to education. Even in many countries, you have more and more increasing of social norms that strengthen and enhance education for both girls and boys. This is important. You have in some also places some protective social norms that really encourage some responsible sexual behaviors and intergenerational communication. You have also some protective social norms regarding child safety online. You have also some kind of protective social norms that in beginning were harmful and they change to become protective. And for example, you have the strong example regarding mutilation, female mutilation, that was done with Tostan in Senegal and in other countries that really they work changing this harmful harmful social norms in a positive social norms. But it was not only through raising awareness campaign, but it was based on engaging entire reference network and in communities really to work on this social norm and to abandon the FGM. It took, just to tell you, it took, and you have it in my presentation, it took at least 2-3 years because you have to involve the leaders, you have to involve not only one person but the groups, you have to involve peers, and you have to provide good information, working with the population. And what is important is the way you frame your message, because you need to frame all this information in language sharing human rights value, but not telling Article 1, 2, 3, 4, but within the traditional values, because we need to be very sure that the communities they didn't feel that they are attacked or shamed from an outside point of view. This is very, very important. You have another point, for example, I can give you the example of my country regarding early and forced marriage. We had a strong law, it was done in 10 years ago, really highlighting and recognizing the full rights of not the full rights, many rights of women, and mainly regarding early and forced marriage, and provide the girls to have to decide by herself to get married after 18 years, and no marriage has to be done before 18. But we realize that laws are not only sufficient, and during 3 years you had a strong really network, mixing NGOs, mixing religious leaders, mixing media that work on message, explaining, discussing with language that's easily accessible to make the reference network taking the lead in changing the norm. This is really important. Regarding also another child protective social norm, regarding youth, it's very important when we are speaking about this emerging social norm among peers and among child and youth communities. You have good practices actually that they are not scaled up in the whole world, in worldwide, but you have children who are empowered and become themselves defenders and protecting children, and using the social network online to provide messages, but to provide guidance, counseling, and to become a new reference network based on child protective social norms. I have a lot, and I can send it to many examples and many references if you need.
So there was one question that came in from Livia Harsu. What has been efficient so far in combating these social norms from your experience? And can education be the key, but it may be too late for some generations?
And I think really, depending on the social norm, as you see, we had a lot in various forms. I think that education is a very, very strong point. This is really important. I think also that, human rights and mainly fighting and combating for having rights for women rights is very important because you have many, many social norms that are really based on gender discrimination, mainly regarding women. And just I want to highlight the fact when we are speaking about education, it doesn't mean only building schools, but it means more wide education, having qualitative access to school, but sexual education, education on child protection issues, to have a more wide education. I think it's really important to be sure that when they have to deal with a kind of reference network that propose a kind of social norm, they are able to do their own assessment and also to have a kind of responses regarding these social norms.
Thank you. Another question, Javier, I think you're still signed on. If you'd like to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Great. So thank you very much for your engaging and detailed presentation, Dr. M'AALLA. My question relates to the point you raised about perception of childhood. In your experience, what sort of processes may effectively drive changes in this perception? In particular, how can reciprocal expectations regarding this cutoff points between childhood and adulthood change to what we deem normatively acceptable, which we have defined by international consensus at 18 years. In recent work that we did with the LINEA network in Brazil, with NGOs working there in these topics, the point was highlighted as essential, precisely because, as you noted, children and adolescents who are victims of abuse or exploitation end up being perceived as guilty, responsible, or freely choosing what is going on. And I would be very interested in hearing how, in your experience, changes in this childhood-adulthood perception occur, and hence how we practitioners, programmers, and policymakers can better work on this front.
Yes, it's very challenging, as you told, because perception, and I think it's one of the main pillar of really regarding social norms. And even you have in many legislation, children is recognized as a person under 18. As I was explaining, you have many practitioners, such as judges, even social workers, who never recognize children and maybe adolescents as children, and in some cases they are really considered as guilty or choosing that. Regarding my experience, and even in my country, we have the same problem. This is really important to work, and I start insisting again on how we deal and the messages we work on it with communities, families, and children themselves, because I want to highlight the fact that many children, between when they start having 14 years and they become puber, in their mind they are not children. In many of them, in many minds of them, just to tell you that also this perception is among children. And I think what is important, the problem is that you need to explain that these are children really under 18, but not only by giving Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, but the message we have to really deliver and to work on within children, within community, is also to have a good understanding of the different phases of development of children, because one children between 0 and 3 years is not the same that between 3 and 6, and between 6 and 12, and between 12 and 16, and so on. Just to take into account the fact that children, regarding this, even it's a normative framework, we need to have in mind this development, psychological, physical, and sexual development. This is one point. The other point, I think, is really important, is regarding mainly sexual exploitation, is regarding the fact that child sexual exploitation or child sexual abuse is, for some persons, is explained because she's puber and she looks like an adult, and he or she chooses it freely. And I think we have to be very, very strong regarding the fact that sexual exploitation, such as prostitution, such as in pornography, online, child sex tourism, we never have to recognize that a child could consent on this because it's a crime. This is important in changing the mind of judge and perception. This is one. The other perception we need to change, mainly regarding girls. Many of population and communities and so on told you, but you see how you see her clothes, you see how her attitude, she is provocant, she is so on. But in the same time, you have to explain that she is free to wear that, but the real guilty person is the guy or the person who is exploiting her. And I think really, and we can discuss in this issue, in my country we work a lot on this issue, and it's not easy because you have to working with the religious leader, with the community, with just to explain that childhood is a normative framework to under 18, but sexual exploitation is a crime, really, and it couldn't be really explained only or justified because she is puber or she chooses it freely. This is one. And the other point is really regarding how you deal with the community, explaining really what means childhood, what are the different steps, and also regarding the fact that children's rights doesn't mean that we are against the social values of some countries, because in many countries, and mainly in Arabo-Islamic countries, we are actually facing two kinds of values. You have the Occidental values who are very permissive and allowing children doing what they want, and you have our traditional values that are protecting children, and we have really to highlight in each society we have endogenous child-positive mechanisms that we want to highlight and make the leaders and children themselves and youth themselves become, delivering these messages and become actors of change. And it is why I was telling that it takes a really long time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We only have one other question that's come through, so maybe we can take that as our last question before we close. That question is from Hugh Salmon.
We're just starting a project on recovery and reintegration from child sexual exploitation, a second phase of funding from the Oak Foundation. And so we're very interested in protective social norms that can support or protect children following sexual exploitation, so in the recovery and reintegration phase. Do you have any examples or experience of when social norms can be protective or supportive in that situation?
We have some, for example, I can tell you here, because I work also with children that were sexually exploited or abused in my country, and we worked a lot with girls who were victims of prostitution or from girls and boys also. And what we did regarding some child protective social norm, what is important first is really to work with the families and communities, because when we are speaking also about recovery and rehabilitation, it's important to build links with the families of origin and the communities of origin, depending, taking into account that sexual abuse or sexual violence were not occurred in families. But if we want really to build this kind of recovery and to empower girls or boys who were victims to be integrated in the society, we need also to work with the society to make sure that the environment will be protected. And in to this end, we had what we call really community and family programs, working with the communities where the children were living before or they are going to come back in this, and we identify some families or some leaders who were living and are living in this community, who become a kind of ambassadors, really sharing messages and really working with them on this issue. And we identify also one very open-minded religious leader who explained to these families and to these communities that even if we take into account the Islam recognizes these children are victims, and we need to protect them, and we need to not blame them. And we work also with the school and teachers where they're really to prepare them to stop stigmatization or rejection of these girls and boys. And at the same time, we work very, very strongly with these youth and these children to empower them, to provide them skills, and to make them also not considering them only themselves as victims, working a lot on resilience to make sure that they are really developing a strong life project and making things change, and in the same time preparing them to deal with some kind of stigmatization or some kind of some taboo, just to be sure that they are not going, to have some bad impact, but in the same time, you need to work very, very strongly with them, involving the families, involving the youth from the community, involving some leaders, making them, owner the project, because they become really your equal. You have to never speak with them as, giving them a lesson, but considering them as a partners. And it's very, very important, involving them in your case management, in assessing the projects, and also to make them really as project holders with you. It's very important, even if it is done in an informal way.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
Welcome.
Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
So maybe if you want to kind of take a minute to wrap up, we unfortunately are out of time for questions and answers.
I just want to highlight the fact that when we are speaking about social norm, we need to have a good knowledge and understanding about all these various and emerging social norms. To bear in mind that we need to identify the reference network, and we need also to understand and to have a good assessment of all these various factors that interact and reinforce social norms. This is very important. And another point I want to highlight that child protective social norms, if we want really to highlight, to strengthen and to promote, that we need first a political commitment. It's really important to have a normative norms. It's important, child protective laws, policies, and so on. But what is important, and I want to highlight, that raising awareness campaigns are not sufficient. We need to have actors that are well-informed and well-trained and credible, really, to deal with this issue. And I want to highlight the fact that it's a sustainable and very, very long process, needing a regular assessment in view to see if this social norm is moving, is changing or not, what kind of correct actions we could do to better to react or to promote this. And another point I think we need, when we are speaking about social norms, we have to be very careful. All of them are not traditional and are not coming from low-income countries. You have social norms worldwide, and they are in many, many countries, even this called development countries.
Thank you so much for your time and really interesting presentation, just hearing about the specific, I think, examples in the countries that you visited really help clarify kind of how norms operate in the child protection space. So just wanted to thank you and to thank all of the participants.